teenager being raped, being trafficked, and decides to stand up for herself, defend herself. She kills the monster that did this to her, freeing her and many others in the process. She gets arrested, she gets prosecuted, and now she has to pay money to the family of the man who raped her. Only in America. Put up a picture full mass. A teen human trafficking victim who fatally stabbed her accused rapist was sentenced Tuesday in Iowa court. Pieper Lewis, 17 years of age, who was initially charged with first-degree murder. We got on top of this quickly in the advocacy community, and they changed it. She was sentenced to 5 years of closely supervised probation. Initially, they wanted to give her many years in prison. They have converted that to 5 years of probation, 600 hours of community service, in order to pay $150,000 restitution to her rapist family. She pleaded last year to involuntary manslaughter and willful injury for the June 2020 killing of a 37-year-old Zachary Brooks of Des Moines. Both charges were punishable by up to 10 years in prison. Now, is this making sense to anybody? The prosecutor, they know what he did. There's no ambiguity. They're not saying, oh, well, you know, maybe he didn't do that. We don't know for sure. No, they know exactly what he did. They know exactly what kind of business he operated. This is self-defense. This is in the defense of yourself and in the defense of others. But she got charged. And if it had not been for the community getting involved, she would have had those 10 years in prison. She should not have been charged at all. I thought conservatives in particular were okay with self-defense. Put up a picture of the monster who did this to her. Brooks was one of the men. Then 15-year-old Miss Lewis was forced to have sex with. Brooks had raped Lewis multiple times in the weeks leading up to his death. After Brooks had raped her yet again, Lewis grabbed a knife from a bedside table, stabbed him more than 30 times. Polk County District Judge, David M. Porter on Tuesday deferred those two 10-year prison sentences. All right, he deferred them. Once again, should not have been necessary, should have been dropped. She should have no criminal record whatsoever. But if Lewis violates any portion of her probation, she could be sent to prison to serve a 20-year term. This is not fair anywhere. This is the criminal justice system showing you exactly what it is. It's operating the way it was designed to operate. Typically, women, especially young women, young girls, they don't have gravitas in that system. She killed a rapist. She should go home with a medal. Man molested, raped child. That child killed her. What are we doing here? Why is this a story? She should have no charges whatsoever. And there is a possibility at exoneration later. It could get overturned on appeal as well. There are options still available. But her plea sealed the actual conviction on the record. The penalty is ridiculous. As for being required to pay restitution, let's talk about this. It's to the estate of the rapist. The court is presented with no other option, Porter said, noting the restitution is mandatory under Iowa law that has been upheld by the Iowa Supreme Court. Put the judge back up for a minute, because I want to say this to the judge directly. The judge does a solid on one hand, where he basically suspends time in prison. And then he says, but I have no choice but to order you to pay $150,000 in restitution. Not true, Judge, based on my research. You could have made a ruling called in the interest of justice, because your ruling would have in fact been contrary to the letter of the statute in Iowa. It would have been aligned to the virtue of justice. Your court is allowed to make rulings in the interest of justice. I checked. Maybe you should too. You could have done contrary to what you did. Officials said Lewis was a runaway who was seeking to escape an abusive life with her adopted mother and was sleeping in the hallways of a Des Moines apartment building when a 28-year-old man took her in before trafficking her to other men for sex. She recounted being forced at knife point by the 28-year-old man to go to Brooks' apartment for sex. Police and prosecutors have not disputed that Miss Lewis was sexually assaulted, molested, trafficked, prostituted as a child. No dispute. But prosecutors have argued that Brooks was asleep at the time he was stabbed and not an immediate danger to Lewis. Iowa is not among the dozens of states that have a so-called safe harbor law that gives trafficking victims at least some level of criminal immunity. Prosecutors took issue with Lewis calling herself a victim in the case and said she failed to take responsibility for stabbing Brooks and leaving his kids without a father. The judge peppered Lewis with repeated questions to explain what poor choices she made that led up to Brooks stabbing, and expressed concern that she sometimes did not want to follow rules set for her in juvenile lockup. Well, young lady, you need to learn a lesson. Damn shame, isn't it? Iowa does have an affirmative defense law that gives some leeway to victims of a crime if the victim committed the violation under compulsion by another's threat of serious injury, provided that the defendant reasonably believed that such injury was imminent. Prosecutors argued Tuesday that Lewis waived that affirmative defense when she pleaded guilty to manslaughter and willful injury. That is correct. She did waive it based on the law. I don't know what kind of lawyer she had on her side, if she had one at all. But this thing should have gone all the way to trial. That's what should have happened. Okay. Farron, thoughts here?
Yeah, this is one of those stories that just absolutely makes your blood boil, because this young woman, for most of her life, has been a victim based on what we know, right? Came from this abusive household, tried to escape that, and like so many other victims of human trafficking, became a victim even further after that. That is where we see a lot of these human trafficking victims come from, runaways trying to escape an abusive household. I mean, I've spoken to so many survivors of human trafficking that this is almost textbook. And so what happens is they end up in yet another abusive situation. And it's almost, according to some of the people I've talked to, because that's what they know. That's how life has always been for some of these individuals. So she becomes a victim again. And then now she's a victim of our lopsided, completely backwards justice system here in the United States. What she did clearly was self-defense. And, you know, you brought up the conservatives, they typically like this. Yeah, there's a lot of people that were defending Kyle Rittenhouse up and down who are just totally silent about what's happened with this poor young woman now. And when they put on her ankle monitor, they said, we got to make sure you don't return to that life of being human trafficked, of being a human trafficking victim. This wasn't a life that she chose. It was something she was forced into. And the court is still, and the justice system still, treating her like she is the one who's done all these things wrong in her life. It is absolutely sick and disgusting the way this young woman is being treated, and the way so many victims of human trafficking are treated every day in this country, as if it's their fault they ended up in these situations.
Very well said, dear brother. And let me say this in closing. She's a child. She was a child when it happened. She's a child today. She was 15 when it happened. She's 17 today. She's still a child. This is a miscarriage of justice to the highest level. She killed her rapist. That took courage. She should receive an award. She's a hero.